Syria, a land steeped in history, has been shaped by empires and civilizations for millennia. From the ancient Mesopotamians to the Romans, Ottomans and French, Syria's strategic location at the crossroads of trade routes has made it a coveted prize. This rich tapestry of cultures is woven into the fabric of Syrian society. However, it is also a reminder of the countless conflicts that have scarred this ancient land. For centuries, Syria was part of the Ottoman Empire. The empire's decline in the early 20th century left a power vacuum. This vacuum was filled by the French under a League of Nations mandate after World War I. This period saw the rise of Syrian nationalism and resistance to French rule. In 1946, Syria finally gained independence. However, the legacy of foreign influence and arbitrary borders continued to cast a long shadow. The years that followed were marked by political instability and coups. The Ba'ath Party, a pan-Arab socialist party, seized power in 1963. This marked a turning point in Syrian history. Hafez al-Assad, a military officer, rose through the ranks of the Ba'ath Party and seized power in a bloodless coup in 1970. Assad's rule was characterized by authoritarianism, repression, and a brutal crackdown on dissent. Despite the lack of political freedoms, Syria experienced a period of relative stability and economic growth under Hafez al-Assad. However, this stability came at a high price. The Assad regime was notorious for its human rights abuses and suppression of any form of opposition. When Hafez al-Assad died in 2000, his son Bashar al-Assad assumed the presidency. Initially, there were hopes that Bashar, a British-trained ophthalmologist, would usher in an era of reform and openness. However, these hopes were quickly dashed as Bashar proved to be a chip off the old block, clinging to power with the same iron fist as his father. In early 2011, the Arab Spring, a wave of pro-democracy uprisings, swept across the Middle East and North Africa. Inspired by the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, protests erupted in Syria, demanding political reforms, greater freedoms, and an end to decades of Assad rule. The Syrian government's response to these peaceful protests was swift and brutal. Security forces opened fire on demonstrators, killing and injuring hundreds. This violent crackdown only fueled the flames of discontent. The protests, initially calling for reforms, quickly escalated into a full-blown uprising against the Assad regime. As the violence escalated, the Syrian army began to fracture. Defectors from the military, unwilling to fire on their own people, formed the Free Syrian Army, or FSA. The FSA, initially a loosely organized group of defectors, became the armed wing of the opposition, marking the beginning of a bloody civil war. By the summer of 2012, Syria was engulfed in a full-scale civil war. The conflict took on a sectarian dimension, with the mainly Sunni Muslim opposition pitted against the Alawite-dominated government. The Alawites, an offshoot of Shia Islam, had long been a privileged minority in Syria. As the conflict raged on, extremist groups exploiting the chaos gained a foothold in Syria. Among them was the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, a jihadist group that rapidly seized territory in Syria and Iraq, declaring a so-called caliphate. The Syrian civil war, once a domestic uprising, transformed into a complex proxy war, with regional and international powers backing different sides. This foreign intervention further fueled the conflict, making a peaceful resolution all the more elusive. Section 5, a global battlefield. The Syrian civil war became a magnet for foreign fighters and jihadists from around the world. The conflict also drew in regional powers, each pursuing their own strategic interests. Iran, a staunch ally of the Assad regime, provided military and financial support, fearing the collapse of a key regional ally. Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, all Sunni-majority countries, backed the mainly Sunni opposition, seeking to counter Iranian influence in the region. The United States, wary of directly intervening in another Middle Eastern quagmire, provided limited military aid to moderate rebel groups. Russia's military intervention in 2015, at the request of the Assad regime, marked a turning point in the war. Russian air power tilted the balance in favor of the Syrian government, enabling it to regain lost territory and consolidate its control. Section 6, the human cost of war. The Syrian civil war has had a devastating impact on the Syrian people, Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been killed. Millions more have been displaced, forced to flee their homes and seek refuge in neighboring countries and beyond. The war has created the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II. The United Nations estimates that over 15 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance. The conflict has also had a profound impact on Syria's economy, infrastructure, and cultural heritage. The Syrian civil war is a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the urgent need for peaceful solutions to political crises. The international community's failure to prevent and resolve this conflict will continue to haunt the world for years to come. Section 7. The Fall of Assad. The year 2024 brought a dramatic turn of events in the seemingly intractable Syrian conflict. The rebel group Tahrir al-Sham, once a formidable force in the opposition, launched a surprise offensive in northwestern Syria in November. The offensive caught the Syrian government off guard, and the rebels made significant territorial gains. The rebel advance culminated in the fall of Damascus on December 8, 2024. After days of heavy fighting, opposition forces captured the Syrian capital, marking a turning point in the war. With the fall of Damascus, the Assad regime, which had clung to power for decades, finally crumbled. The collapse of the Assad regime was met with a mix of jubilation and apprehension. While many Syrians celebrated the end of a brutal dictatorship, the future remained uncertain. The country was fractured, the economy in ruins, and millions remained displaced. Section 8. A fragile peace. The fall of the Assad regime ushered in a fragile peace in Syria. The international community, caught off guard by the sudden collapse of the regime, scrambled to respond to the new reality. The United Nations called for a ceasefire and the formation of a transitional government. Negotiations between the Syrian opposition and representatives of the former regime, facilitated by the United Nations, began in Geneva in early 2025. The talks were fraught with challenges as deep divisions and mistrust lingered between the warring parties. The international community pledged billions of dollars in aid for the reconstruction of Syria. However, the task of rebuilding a war-torn country ravaged by years of conflict and humanitarian crisis proved to be daunting. Section 9. The Long Road Ahead. As Syria emerges from the ashes of a devastating civil war, the road ahead is long and uncertain. The country faces immense challenges, including rebuilding its shattered infrastructure, healing deep societal divisions, and ensuring a just and lasting peace. The international community has a responsibility to assist Syria in its transition to a peaceful and democratic future. This includes providing humanitarian aid, supporting the reconstruction process, and promoting reconciliation and justice. The Syrian civil war serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the urgent need for peaceful solutions to political crises. The international community must learn from the mistakes made in Syria and work to prevent future tragedies.